Tonight, a trail of targeted threats. New footage of a bold shooting linked to a growing extortion scheme. The warning behind a hail of bullets.
You don't feel safe anymore.
And the fear gripping Canada's South Asian community.
You have blood on your hands.
Face to face with families. Mark Zuckerberg's apology over online child safety. Also, final findings of the inquest into a stabbing rampage on a Saskatchewan First Nation. Plus, the social impact as fertility rates drop to a record low.
A very clear decreasing trend.
And biting into a debate that goes against the grain.
No, that's not a bagel. I think this is a new trend.
The bagel gets an unholy new twist.
CTV National News with Omar Sachedina.
Good evening, everyone. New warnings tonight about international threats on Canadian businesses and those who own and operate them. The extortion schemes in Ontario, BC, and Alberta appear to be targeted. And as CTV's Adrian Gobriel reports, the criminals are showing no signs of relenting.
Bullets fly on a cold December night. The target, an exotic car dealership in Brampton, Ontario, owned by South Asian businessmen.
You don't feel safe anymore.
Police say this shooting and several others across the country may be linked to an organized international extortion racket, taking aim at South Asian business owners. West of Toronto and Peel region, more than 20 companies have each reported receiving extortion calls or WhatsApp messages demanding they hand over $1 million. At least 6 of those who refuse to pay have had their businesses shot at, including Nawab Motors.
Just days ago, armed gunmen arrived back at this car dealership and shot it up for a second time. Take a look at this new bullet hole. The steel plate recently installed behind this window stopped the bullet.
If you're growing your business, be very careful because eventually these guys will get you.
Eerily similar violent extortion attempts have been reported in Surrey, BC, prompting the mayor of Surrey and Brampton to pen this letter to the Minister of Public Safety, saying the complexity and interjurisdictional nature of these crimes necessitate a more comprehensive strategy involving provincial and federal authorities.
Mayor Brown, do you believe that organized crime is behind this?
Absolutely. These investigations have led police in Ontario and in British Columbia, now in Alberta, to determine that these organizations reside in India, outside of Canadian borders.
This video was posted on a Harry Chatha TikTok page. Chatha is a known gang leader in India. This comes as additional violence targeting the South Asian community have led to Cineplex to pull screenings of South Indian language films in the Greater Toronto area after 4 drive-by shootings at theaters. Inside Nawab Motors, the sales manager shares that some associates have returned to India, claiming South Asian violence in Canada is now out of control.
If somebody can do it in the middle of the night, they can do it in the middle of the day as well. I haven't seen any news that, people who did it, they have been caught. So 100% something needs to be done.
The gunfire has done more than leave holes. It's also pierced any sense of security for an entire community.
The owner here at Nawab Motors says he's left the country and he's contemplating pulling his business investments out as well. Omar.
All right, Adrian, thank you. The heads of 5 social media giants were grilled in Washington today over the harms their products are posing to their youngest users. The testimony so tense at times it pushed Facebook's CEO to come face to face with a gallery of parents in pain. Here's CTV's Washington Bureau Chief Joy Melvin.
Think about the truth, so help you God.
Some of the biggest names in tech faced an angry room of lawmakers, packed with grieving parents who say their kids were hurt by social media.
Mr. Zuckerberg, you and the companies before us, I know you don't mean it to be so, but you have blood on your hands. You have a product. You have a product that's killing people.
Too young. They faced blistering questions over what they are and are not doing to protect kids from cyberbullying and sexual predators lurking online.
Please explain to me and to all these parents why explicit predatory content does not violate your platform's terms of service.
Well, we've reported I think it's more than 26 million examples of this kind of content.
Didn't take it
people
down
to
until a congressional staffer brought it up.
It may be that in this case we made a mistake and missed something.
I think you make a lot of mistakes.
The CEOs insisting they're doing what they can to make their sites safe.
Safety is one of the core priorities that defines TikTok under my leadership.
Looking at content.
But lawmakers weren't buying it. The most striking moment of the day when this senator challenged Meta's Mark Zuckerberg to apologize.
You're on national television. Would you like now to apologize to the victims who have been harmed by your product? Show them the pictures.
Clearly rattled, Zuckerberg did and promised to do more. Senators are clearly exasperated that self-policing isn't working, driving home the point with video from those still suffering.
I was sexually exploited on Instagram.
My son Riley died from suicide after being sexually exploited on Facebook.
It's been 28 years, since the internet. We haven't passed any of these bills. And the reason they haven't passed is because of the power of your companies.
After years of talking about it, Democrats and Republicans, in a rare show of unity, seem determined to bring in tough new legislation to police social media. We'll see. Omar?
All right, Joy, thank you. Some progress tonight in the investigation into last week's plane crash that killed 6 people in the Northwest Territories. The crucial cockpit voice recorder has been found and could provide more information about the cause. Finally, a path forward tonight after a judge in Nova Scotia revealed more than 24 recommendations following an inquiry into an Afghan vet who killed 3 members of his family, then turned the legally purchased gun on himself. But key information about his mental health was never shared with firearms officers. CTV's Annie Bergeron-Oliver on the glaring gaps.
After 2 tours in Afghanistan, Corporal Lionel Desmond medically released from the military with post-traumatic stress disorder and major depressive disorder. Conditions a Nova Scotia judge said required consistent and comprehensive mental health treatment that wasn't always there.
It took many months to ramp up the care that he so desperately needed. This despite time being of the essence. No one person should have a finger pointed at. The issue is systemic.
On January 3rd, 2017, Desmond shot and killed his mom, wife, and their 10-year-old daughter with a gun he had purchased that morning. He then turned it on himself.
Absolutely, the system let him down. Corporal Desmond had a very complex medical history, but when he shows up in the provincial system, that is completely unknown to anybody.
The court sat for 56 days over several years, and today Justice Paul Scoville made 25 recommendations to improve support services to Canadian veterans and their families. Among them, the recommendation that the province of Nova Scotia push the federal government to have a case manager assigned to veterans transitioning out of the armed forces, that the province update its suicide risk assessment and intervention policy, and that Nova Scotia provide more comprehensive virtual care to rural African Nova Scotian communities.
If they don't get it right, then then I guess they're not looking to get it right. I mean, the recommendations are there. The guide is there for what they need.
The Veterans Affairs Minister admits more needs to be done and says changes have already been made.
This includes increased case management services, more robust mental health supports, and a redesigned transition process.
The final recommendation is the creation of an implementation committee with at least a 5-year mandate to ensure that the suggested changes, Omar, are put in place.
All right, Annie, thank you. And late tonight, a jury in Saskatchewan revealed its recommendations on the massacre at James Smith Cree Nation. The worst stabbing in Canada's history killed 11 people. CTV's Alison Bamford on the key takeaways.
It brought such relief.
There's hope for James Smith Cree Nation members after enduring a long, emotional inquest.
It's not perfect recommendations, but it's practical. At the end of the day, I think there's comfort in this inquest and the recommendations that are going to be implemented.
The jury and coroner made 29 recommendations directed toward Correctional Service Canada, the Ministry of Public Safety, the RCMP, and James Smith Cree Nation leadership. Some related to statutory release, supports for Indigenous offenders, and police practices.
I'll be sending a letter to each agency that's been involved
with the recommendations, asking for a reply and what they're going to do with those recommendations.
A third of the recommendations call on the Mounties to increase staffing levels in certain units and improve communication with First Nation leaders.
I think because there is a lot of positivity that can come out of those recommendations, that we will work very hard to address those recommendations and do what we can to implement.
What's missing for many family members, any mention of intergenerational trauma or recommendations to break the cycle. But in a community where you don't have to go far to be reminded of the 2022 attacks, families hope the end of the inquest can be the start of a better future.
So if my sister's death means that something positive is going to come out of this, then her legacy is going to live on.
The community will now turn their attention to a second inquest for the killer, Miles Sanderson. A new jury will be responsible for determining how he died in custody just moments after he was arrested. That's scheduled for the end of February. Omar?
All right, Allison, thank you. Ottawa is giving Ontario $121 million to fight organized crime.
I have a message to all the criminals. We're coming after you, we're going to catch you, and you're going to jail.
The money will go towards gangs, guns, and curbing auto theft, which is at a record high. Organized crime also suspected in a major drug bust. 400 kilos of meth were discovered in a truck coming from the U.S. into Manitoba. The street value, around $50 million. Days of drenching rain and snowmelt from record high temperatures in British Columbia are causing rivers to burst and prompting flood warnings across the southwestern part of the province. CTV's Ben Milger is in the village of Pemberton, where there is a state of emergency.
High stream flows cascading out of the mountains have the Lillooet River flowing right to the top of its banks, even spilling over in some places in the village of Pemberton. The flooding closed Airport Road for the better part of 2 days, as all properties beyond this point were under evacuation order. That included the local search and rescue base, the town's water treatment plant, and the airport, where the landing strip remains underwater and someone's small plane is still partially submerged. The evacuation order here has since been downgraded to an alert.
We did get a bit of a reprieve. The good news is there was a bit of a stall between rainfall, and it allowed some of our waterways to lower, our canals and our rivers to lower a little bit.
With water still lapping across roadways, dozens of properties remain on evacuation alert. Crews are out in force, shoring up dikes and making temporary repairs to roads and culverts damaged by the rising water. Trouble spots will be monitored hour by hour until the high water recedes.
We don't know how that will go. Unfortunately, we do have experience with flooding in the Pemberton Valley, and so we take this very seriously.
According to the mayor, this type of rapid melt is typically seen in the fall or spring, not the end of January. He says both the provincial and federal emergency preparedness ministers reached out to offer assistance. And once the immediate threat subsides, he'll be looking to them for funding.
We have identified really important infrastructure projects that can help protect against floods, recognizing that this is happening more often at different times of year.
The threat here is far from over, with some areas still underwater and rivers flowing high and fast. It wouldn't take much more rain to create an even greater flood risk. Omar?
All right, Ben, thank you for this tonight. Washington is officially blaming an Iran-backed militia for an attack that killed 3 U.S. troops and wounded dozens. A group called the Islamic Resistance in Iraq was allegedly behind this weekend's drone strike on an American Army base in Jordan. These are the first American casualties in the Middle East since the Israel-Hamas war broke out. U.S. media reports tonight the Pentagon is preparing to strike back. Iran has already said it is ready to retaliate. Ukraine and Russia completed a prisoner swap today. About 200 soldiers on each side are going home. This was the first such exchange since the recent downing of a Russian plane that Moscow claims was carrying Ukrainian prisoners. Coming up, the fall in Canada's fertility rate.
Women are having children later in life.
The factors behind the historic low, plus an unidentified flying mystery.
Yeah, forming a triangle, then flying away and coming back.
Canada's population has been growing at a pace not seen in decades, but the boom is not coming from babies. A new snapshot shows the fertility rate has hit a new low. CTV's Sarah Plowman explains.
Jessica Peters is preparing for her baby girl, due next week.
We are very excited. It's our first.
Another birth counted into Canada's fertility rate that in 2022 reached an all-time low, with 1.33 births per woman.
And we found that there's been a very clear decreasing trend in fertility in recent years.
A dip in births that began a decade before the pandemic, but accelerated when it hit. Despite an uptick in births in 2021, there was a big drop in 2022, the biggest since the 70s, during the baby bust.
Maybe the pandemic is continuing to have some sort of secondary effects that are influencing people's fertility decisions.
Canadians may be having fewer babies, but the country is still growing, largely due to immigration. Still, a falling fertility rate has consequences.
We have to prepare for population aging over the next couple of decades unless our fertility rates recover.
When it comes to infertility, there are multiple contributing factors.
More and more over the past 2 decades, we've seen women having children later in life. There's also data saying that sperm counts are decreasing.
There's a patchwork of coverage for fertility treatments across provinces, ranging from some to none at all. This infertility specialist wants more attention paid to education.
You spend time thinking about where you're going to live or what you're going to do for your education. And I think we need to do the same thing when it comes to planning for a family.
Peters always knew she wanted a family, but didn't know when, until she met her husband a year and a half ago.
We just decided that getting married, starting a family here would be a beautiful thing.
The drop in birth rate is not unique to Canada. Besides the US, it happened in every G7 country. Sarah Plowman, CTV News, Fredericton.
Alberta has unveiled a series of controversial new measures affecting the transgender community.
Prematurely encouraging or enabling children to alter their very biology or natural growth, no matter how well-intentioned and sincere, poses a risk to that child's future that I, as Premier, am not comfortable with permitting in our province.
The province will ban gender-affirming surgeries for those 17 and under, and children under 15 will now need parental consent to alter their pronouns. Still ahead, a souring relationship. The wrath over grapes. Western neighbors wage war over wine. A war over wine is developing in Western Canada tonight after Alberta's Liquor Control Board warned wineries in British Columbia that it won't stock their product in stores unless they stop shipping directly to consumers. Here's CTV's Heather Wright.
An interprovincial gripe over grapes. Alberta's liquor regulator is cutting off some BC wineries, warning them to stop shipping their bottles directly to customers.
It's the only industry. If I was making any other product, I can send it to Alberta and they can send theirs here.
John Skinner owns Painted Rock Winery in Penticton and received this letter from Alberta Gaming Liquor and Cannabis, which says inbound shipments received after January 22, 2024 will be refused unless Painted Rock Winery agrees to immediately cease direct-to-consumer shipping operations to Alberta. Skinner says it's been a challenging few years for BC wineries, with cold weather freezes and devastating wildfires. And wineries rely on the cash flow wine clubs and direct-to-consumer shipments provide. He calls this letter disappointing.
Every other country in the world allows for the free transfer of wine produced in their nation, within their nation.
But in Canada, the laws surrounding alcohol purchase and delivery vary from province to province. In a statement, the AGLC says the suppliers are bypassing Alberta's private liquor retailers and agencies, and without oversight, the AGLC cannot ensure these products are being sold only to adults over the age of 18.
The message to wineries is we want your wines here in Alberta. Go through the proper channels, register your product, you can get it here.
Skinner says this latest fight shows it's time Canada overhaul its rules about shipping beer and wine across provincial lines, a way to give Canadian wineries access to a larger pool of buyers.
Why don't we come up with some kind of a flat tax? And we'll all be happy to remit it.
The BC wine industry has hired a lawyer and is reviewing its legal options. But the AGLC says these rules are nothing new. They're just being more strictly enforced. Heather Wright, CTV News, Toronto.
An innocuous social media post by Sesame Street's furry red Muppet has unleashed an outpouring of despair.
I'm so happy to see you.
Elmo asked his 500,000 followers how everybody was doing. Turns out, not so great. This one is depressed and broke. Another just got laid off. One follower chose a dramatic reply saying the world is burning around us, while this person just needed a hug. The resounding venting made Elmo respond he is glad he asked and will check in again soon. Clearly, Elmo cares. And several airline pilots flying over the Canadian prairies noticed some mysterious lights in the sky and radioed air traffic control about it.
Yeah, forming triangle, then flying away and coming back. 3 lights in a triangle formation, just flying in a random movement, up and down, left, right, all over the place.
Yeah, it is really quite bizarre.
No one knows what it was. After the break,
we didn't know it would create such a commotion.
A whole new look for the bagel. In a city that boasts about having the best bagels in the world, one of its most famous shops is committing what some are calling a baking betrayal. Here's CTV's Montreal Bureau Chief Geneviève Beauchemin.
A Montreal institution for nearly 7 decades. Saint-Viateur Bagel has never been embroiled in such a controversy.
We didn't know it would create such a commotion.
At the center of it all, this bagel without a hole.
No, that's not a bagel. No, it's a bun, right? It's not a bagel. I will not go for it.
This is a first for this renowned house of bagels. Never before has the hole needed to be filled.
It's part of a promotion by a cream cheese company that wanted something with more, well, real estate for its creamy topping. For a sandwich, like you're saying, you know, you've got.
Yeah, it could be like. Can you imagine like cream cheese and onion and thick slabs of salmon on this? How amazing that would be!
You're making me hungry.
I think this is a new trend.
But in a city where bagels are sacred, these ones are now dubbed unholy bagels. We took them to an expert, a Bipoco.
All right, this is not a bagel.
Theories abound as to why there is a hole. Some say it dates back to the 13th century to distinguish this Jewish bread from other bread.
By the way, the word bagel means bracelet. It comes from the German word bracelet. So by definition, it is round with a hole.
Heresy or not, even those who find this distasteful promise not to take it too far.
No, I'm not going to cause any trouble.
You're not going to protest?
I'm just not, no protest. I'm just not going to buy them.
But others are.
Yeah, so we've just sold out of those for now.
The unholy bagels are selling like hotcakes.
You're the connoisseur here?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Listen, this is bagel. This is it. I found this too doughy for me.
Perhaps an added argument for those who say no bagel worth its salt would find itself in this shape.
Yeah, you can see the difference.
Geneviève Beauchemin, CTV News, Montreal.
Feeling hungry all of a sudden. And that's a snapshot of this Wednesday for all of us at CTV National News. Thank you for watching. Good night and see you tomorrow.